EdTech Mondays Africa is supported by the MasterCard Foundation Center for Innovative Teaching and Learning and is part of the MasterCard Foundation Young Africa Works programming.
Hello and welcome to this edition of EdTech Mondays Africa. My name is Joy Doreen Bira and it's so good to have you joining us on this edition where we're talking about scaling impact for education transformation. Now, by the year 2050, 25% of all children born globally will be in Africa. Now more than ever before, there is a high perception of value for education, with more than 40% of Africans believing learning is the most important input for a successful life. The question is, how impactful is our education today, especially for young learners across Africa? How can we scale impact for transformative education on a continent with the youngest population globally? According to global research firm Brookings, simply identifying effective education initiatives and expanding them to more people is not enough. Scaling and sustaining the impact of education initiatives requires a combination of technical expertise, understanding local contexts, strategic policies, collaborative partnership, flexible adaptation, and shared vision. Our panelists on this edition, from Accra, Ghana, we're joined by Olufemi Adewumi, Programs Director, MEST, an Africa-wide technology entrepreneur training program, internal seed fund, and network of hubs offering incubation for technology startups in Africa. We're also joined by Genevieve Simiu, Chief Operations Officer, Chalkboard Education, and she's also an alumni of the 2020 cohort of the MasterCard Foundation EdTech Fellowship. And she joins us from Accra, Ghana. We also have Tom Okoya, who is the head of EdTech at the Teachers Service Commission, an independent commission established to regulate, maintain, and manage the teaching service through sound policies and operational excellence for quality teaching and lifelong learning. He joins us from Mombasa in Kenya. And finally, we have Sally Kimeu, who is the territory manager at Nunetics. Thank you all for joining us. And let's begin with the FAT question. How impactful has education been on the African continent so far?
Talking from my experience as an educationist, we have seen a great impact in the education sector in the use of ICT in teaching. Teachers have transited greatly to using technology in their teaching. We are seeing great increase in the use of virtual lab. And we're also seeing a lot of application and invention and innovation among the young people in the education. So we have seen a great impact in education and also in other fields.
All right. Genevieve, what's your assessment of the impact education is having on the continent?
There's been a rise when it comes to use of educational technology, but I'll go a little further back to before independence for a lot of these African countries. The quality of education that our parents received has really worked and set us up to where we are now. For instance, we have access to opportunities that they did not have. We have access to resources that they did not have. And this is all because of going through a quality education system that they went through and have enabled us to reach the heights that we are reaching and working at right now.
All right. Femi, your thoughts?
One of the areas that we've seen major impact is in our government. The kind of conversations I hear government people having nowadays is a lot more advanced than the sort of things I would hear them like 10, 15 years ago. And I think it's because we now have a lot more people that have a lot more education in government. And of course, this improves the kind of conversations, kind of decisions and policies that they're moving on. We're hearing government people talking about using ChatGPT to help teachers in learning. We wouldn't have seen this sort of thing 15 years ago.
All right. Sally, I want to hear your thoughts as well. What do you make of the impact we've had so far with education?
A lot of people have been able to improve their own economic livelihoods and grow their societies. The second thing is the improvement of literacy levels. Education, and especially technology, has enabled more people access information that they were not able to access in the past. And therefore, the literacy levels tend to go higher. And when you have high economic impacts and higher literacy levels, then you see a lot more social and economic stability in the African continent and in many economies.
You know, there's so many challenges that we do face on the continent in terms of scaling and attempting to scale EdTech solutions. But let's look at the challenge and the solution. What are some of those challenges and how are we being part of the solution?
some of the biggest challenges are around access. EdTech companies are not able to get access to the target audience, the learners, or in some cases the schools that need to use their solutions, because there are really, really strong gatekeepers in the space. Government being one of them, parents being some of the gatekeepers as well. These are really strong gatekeepers that dictate or guard or may enhance, depending on how you look at it, how we get access to learners. And I think being able to navigate this space, work with these gatekeepers, really will determine how we're able to scale EdTech in Africa. And it differs. I mean, there's so much similar. There's governments in Ghana, governments in Nigeria, governments in Kenya. However, there are different levels of advancement in terms of their acceptance of technology in education. And these are some of the things that we have to deal with. It may be easier in Kenya, for example, in Nigeria, to convince the government to give you access to learners to use EdTech.
Access. All right. Dr. Mboya, what do you think are some of the biggest challenges we're facing today when it comes to scaling EdTech initiatives?
One of the challenges are the skills that our educators have in EdTech, because our educators, when they go through their pre-service training, they are not privileged to be taken through technology as a tool for teaching and learning. And therefore, that limits the access the learners have in accessing technology and also being able to, explore the different opportunities that technology offers to them, because the educators are. And therefore, one challenge is our educators lacking the necessary technological skills that will be able to facilitate learning. The other one is the issue of infrastructure. We have a very big variation in our schools in terms of access to ICT tools and also technological like internet, which limits some of the hard to reach areas, schools in the hard to reach areas. And therefore there's need to think about how we can bridge that gap. And like I said, the other one also is the parental involvement in supporting educate, because you see the policy in our country that learners are not supposed to have mobile phones or technology like that, but therefore they rely on both the parents are supporting this.
Okay, great. Genevieve, chalkboard education is trying to find solutions to some of the challenges that Dr. Mboya has talked about. Do you want to take us through some of those and how you are being part of the solution?
Yes, to echo Dr. Mboya's point, we've seen the difference between what teachers are experiencing pre-service and what they're learning, and then what they get to meet when they're actually in service and teaching in the classrooms. So we realized 2020, when we realized that, the governments have given a go-ahead for education to take place online, and the teachers are willing, they had their notes and they thought that, okay, great, all we need to do is upload these notes and distribute it to our learners, and we have done our teaching bit of things. However, we realized that that was not the case, and that was not the best way to roll things out, because there's a different kind of skill required to do EdTech. You need to align yourself pedagogically. You need to learn how to create content that will be engaging, interactive for the learners, that can actually measure if learning has taken place. And you also need to be able to assess the different kind of tools that different kind of learners need. The teachers also needed to be aware that the kind of tools they need to use need to be inclusive. As Dr. Tom has mentioned, that infrastructure can be a barrier. And we saw this, increasing the digital divide across different settings, for instance, rural and urban, where, in urban settings, you have access to different kind of gadgets. You have a laptop, you might have a tablet, your parents might have a smartphone that you can use, but this was not the case in the rural communities. So for teachers to think that, you just upload the content and go, that wasn't working. And we are now coming in as a chalkboard education to show them how to roll out different kind of teaching methodologies for different kind of learners, for different kind of tools and platforms available to different realities. I also want to talk about what Dr. Femi mentioned, that one of the barriers to scaling is the policies and the regulations. So as an entrepreneur, of course, that was quite an annoyance. It's like every other tech is moving across barriers quite quickly. However, EdTech is regulated at every single, step of interaction. So when you're talking to the teachers, there's a bit of regulation there. When you're talking to the parents, there's a bit of pushback. When you're talking to the ministry, which is now the owner of education in the different countries, we realize that, we need to align ourselves to these different policies and processes to include technology in education. So we, for instance, have taken our different learners or our different products through the education strategic policy in Ghana, and make sure we're aligning ourselves so that when we have conversations with ministry, with the different kind of stakeholders, we're aligned, and then it's an easier process for us to move through this kind of let's call it loopholes.
Sally, Dr. Mboya mentioned infrastructure as one of the other challenges because EdTech in itself is not as affordable as one would think, especially from the infrastructure side, because there's need to lay, the data cables for them to be able to get to these schools as well, and other factors really. But Nutanix is trying to fit into that or to close that gap in this case. Tell us how.
So Nutanix is able to provide modular solutions for any customer that wants to develop technology, not just in EdTech, any technology. One of the greatest challenges that they face is, of course, having the infrastructure in place and the cost of the infrastructure. So being able to have, one, an easy-to-scale solution, ordering just what you need now and growing and paying as you grow. And the second thing is being able to have a very flexible solution that allows you to scale. And Nutanix is able to fill both those gaps. There's one more thing Dr. Mboya spoke about, which was the uneven training of the teachers. And when they go to the field, then they have challenges because they've not been trained specifically. Another way Nutanix is able to solve that is having a very simple, a very scalable solution. Technology is always a challenge when it is complex, because then either people decide not to use it because it is too complex to use it, or cut corners in using it, and therefore it is not effective. But when you have a simple to use solution, a solution that the teachers don't need too much training, just simple user acceptance training, they're able to get into classes and teach, then that works very well for them. So yeah, I would say those are the two ways that which we can be able to solve the problem.
All right. There's so much talk about having younger teachers, joining the service. And maybe we should even say Gen Z teachers. Do we need more Gen Z teachers, Dr. Mboya?
We need more Gen Z teachers. That one is for sure, because they have the energy and you can be sure they have the passion to drive the agenda. I wanted to speak to policy. How do we hack the policy in the government circle to ensure that we have effective collaboration between government and the people in the EdTech, like Genevieve and also Sally. Government has to control the space of education because that's where we influence the learners, both socially and also in future. So that control is necessary. However, one of the things that we have found to be very useful is to invest more on spaces which are not within the school setting that teachers can access. And I think the things that we have, like the maker spaces where teachers go to learn coding, they go because these are skills the teachers are yearning for. They want them. They have heard about them and they know that's what will make them relevant in class. But it is also expensive to craft a curriculum. It will take time to craft a curriculum and bring the teachers on board. So we need to think about how to create more spaces outside the classroom where teachers can be able to access, and also the young people can access, to be able to upskill themselves or skill themselves.
All right. So as we talk about creating more spaces, let's also get back to what Femi had talked about. The fact that sometimes the government is difficult to deal with, where, embracing technology and also implementing it. For example, if there's a Genevieve out there with a solution that can work and is relevant to a specific country's education needs, but then the government is not quick enough to take it up. How do you address the challenge of government not being able to embrace technology as fast as it should?
What I can speak is the entry point. Most of the time, when you miss the right entry point or you don't talk to the right people in government, it will be difficult to be able to penetrate. Like I've seen so many initiatives that are started targeting teachers, but the Teacher Service Commission is not even aware. Because you see, if you want to deal with the teachers cannot be withdrawn from class to attend us. So it is important for the players who are coming with solutions like Genevieve and Sally to know that they need to understand which is the button to press, who is the person to talk to be, because there must be some internal system that will be used to push this agenda through the government system. It can only be pushed easily with somebody who is within the system, who has understood the processes, who can be able to come and push that into the policy, in the government policy system. So I'll give an example that when COVID struck, a few of us decided to run online teaching, and therefore the government was able to see and be able to embrace and now be able to bring on board stakeholders to support remote learning methodology, something that I'm running at the Teacher Service Commission, as a result of an effort that was done by the stakeholder outside. So to crack the bureaucratic processes in government, then you must know the person that can really drive that agenda. Not everybody in government, our position, in like the military, they have different ranks. The positions the government determine how the policy can be pushed through.
I would like for us to touch on the metrics and indicators that should be used to assess the impact of EdTech on student learning outcomes, because I think when we talk about education equity, we can't talk about it without really assessing the impact of student learning outcomes. And Genevieve, I want to start with you on this one, because maybe you can talk about the reach that you've had with Chalkboard and dealing with the different schools that you're interacting with. How has that been able to inform further decisions and other innovations that you're coming up with?
We can't ignore how important it is for us and how important it is to make evidence-based decisions. Initially, when you're in a classroom setting, you're looking at the quantitative stuff. You're like, what percentage is a pass mark? How many people are meeting a percentage? And then, you're really about EdTech, you're actually able to be a bit more understanding of the kind of learning that has taken place. So in addition to just looking at the grades and seeing how many students have passed and codes or failed, we're also able to understand the kind of engagement they have on the platform. As we mentioned, the EdTech will succeed if it's inclusive and it will be different kind of learners and different kind of realities. So you're able to understand that, okay, maybe the learner didn't understand this kind of content because it wasn't aligned or customized to their reality or their setting. So naturally, they would not be able to relate with it and they're not able to pass an examination. They're not able to put themselves in a situation where they're supposed to cram, or as we say in Ghana, chew and pour whatever they have learned. So they're not, you would assume that they have failed the exam, but then you as an educator are supposed to analyze that data and question it and ask yourself, why are these students not getting the pass mark that has been put in place? We're also able to assess the kind of skills developed. And what we recommend is that you need to use a baseline. You need to have a starting point where you see that this kind of learners are at this point, but we as a nation, we as an organization want to get our learners to this kind of baseline within the next 5 years, 10 years, 30 years, whatever goals you're targeting. So you need to be able to have that as a standard to inform the kind of teaching that you're doing, the kind of assessment that you'll do as well, the kind of skills that you need the learners to have and to develop by the end of the lesson, be by the time they're done with the subject or whatever it is that they're learning. Another thing that we also need to assess in addition to the quantitative metrics is the qualitative. So as Dr. Mboya mentioned, you need to really engage the stakeholders. You need to understand what kind of stakeholders you're engaging in the education space. As Femi mentioned, you have teachers, you have parents, you have the government, you have the learners themselves. So you need to be able to align yourselves with all their needs and ensure that the solution is providing the quality that they want and the quality that they expect from you. So that's the best way that you would be able to carry forward or sustain yourself in an environment, as opposed to just rolling out a solution that would work well for one situation, but does not meet the needs of other stakeholders. Then you'll be shooting yourself in the foot to think that you could be very far with that kind of approach.
Femi, as an incubator / accelerating tech hub, how intentional are you at making sure that the solutions, in this case, the EdTech solutions that you are incubating or accelerating, are relevant to your country's educational needs and also educational pedagogies?
One of the very first things I we've learned is just alluding to Dr. Boya's comment about an EdTech entrepreneurs not understanding the government's needs or the government's nuances, and so not knowing how to engage. One of the things we've learned is that the government actually has needs, stated needs around EdTech. They may call it ICT and not use the word EdTech, but those are stated needs. They've actually, like for example, in Ghana, they've gone to a lot of extent to define the kind of programs, the kind of outcomes, interventions they're looking for. And so one of the things we're able to do is bring EdTechs into our fellows into the conversation with the government to better understand what the government's needs are. And we're hearing that you fellows or you EdTech entrepreneurs, if your needs or if your solutions align with our needs, then you're in a better position to get our support, because we want to get to those learners as well. We want to improve learning outcomes, but you need to understand our plan, our goals, the things we've laid out, and then align to that. Then it will be easier for you to support. So this is how we as a hub are helping by working with the government. First, by ourselves to understand those nuances. How Dr. Boya said that you need to know the entry point. It's even difficult to know the entry points. The government is complex. I can show you the organization of the government, Ministry of Education in Ghana. It's complex. You can have different topics being addressed by like 3 different stakeholders, and you don't know who to address. But the more we engage with them, the better we understand the system, and we're able to support the fellows.
Yeah, deeper engagements to be able to understand who best to speak to, who best to address certain challenges. Sally, let's talk about partnerships. I know that Femi had started talking about it and how they're engaging government as well. But let's talk about the partnerships that you're having that are making this easier for implementers of solutions like Genevieve's and Femi's to still be able to put out their solutions without many challenges to overcome.
So partnerships are very critical, and I want to echo what everybody has said. The reason why partnerships are critical is because they allow scalability and they allow the solutions to be adopted. When people feel included and part of the solution, then they support the solution. If we could take what Dr. Boyer talked about, knowing the right person to speak to. It's not just about knowing the right person to speak to, it is also knowing who else is going to be impacted by whatever solution that you are bringing into place. So partnerships can help in a couple of ways. Number one is to have very clear goals that are mutual. So those goals need to be shared, and you have a clear understanding and communication of those goals so that everybody can say, this is what we set out to achieve. This is where we are at. These are the challenges that we are facing. And then leveraging the expertise of each person, because as you can see, all of us here bringing a different perspective into the EdTech platform. So leveraging the expertise of those in the educational sector, leveraging the expertise of the entrepreneurs and the private sector like myself and Genevieve, and leveraging the expertise of technology innovators like Dr. Femi. That way, every person is able to bring in their experience. For example, the private sector can bring in the technology that is required to be able to drive EdTech solutions. The education institutions can then give us insights into the pedagogical needs that are there for the teachers, so that the two of you, with the strengths and the partnerships that you bring in, you're able to solve problems quickly. And then I think one very important thing, and Genevieve touched on it, is the matrix that you use to measure. It's not just measuring for today, it's having longitudinal studies so that you're able to attribute the impact or the change of the students' outcomes to EdTech, because the students could have decided to study better and therefore they have improved results. If you do longitudinal research, you keep bringing in different aspects, then you're able to understand, can I attribute these changes and these outcomes to the technological interventions that have taken place?
Right. And I like the fact that, it's also important to know who you're partnering with for you to be able to bring this full circle. I want us to touch really on also making sure that we understand how to effectively evaluate the scalability and sustainability of EdTech interventions over time. Let's say we've talked about the partnerships, we've talked about the metrics, we've talked about how intentional we should be about making sure that we are scaling EdTech in a meaningful manner. But Dr. Mboya, I want to come back to you. How do we create an enabling environment for scaling EdTech innovations across the continent, given the myriad of challenges, but also possible solutions that we've been able to discuss?
Let me pick it up from what Sally has talked about, the need of harnessing the potentials of the different players that have in Africa. We need to look at building a collaborative environment where both the people, the teachers and the education policymakers are able to tap into the knowledge that is there in the private sector. Because for sure, the private sector has a big role to develop solutions that teachers and also the education stakeholder can use. We have seen this happen in Africa. We are seeing assessment tools coming on board. Teachers are using them. We have seen so many products that are coming from the field. I mean, from the different innovators in the EdTech space that teachers are using. So one thing that I think will help is to scale up that conversation and to create spaces where there's knowledge sharing. Because I think that is one of the areas that we are missing. We need to create more space where the innovators in the education can be able to invite the education policymakers and teachers to come and see what are the possibilities and how the technology can be able to be utilized to improve learning outcome. The other thing that I would say will be involvement is to try and see how we can scale up, provide the infrastructure for schools. This infrastructure can be either co-shared, it can also be sessions where learners, regardless of where they are, have access to these spaces where they can be able to learn tech, including in the special needs. You know, I was visiting a school the other day for the SNE, and I saw how they are learning coding, the HI, the hearing impairment, by an organization that is actually spearheading this initiative in that particular school. If this type of initiative can be scaled up and be multiplied across the African continent, then we are sure that our learners and teachers will be able to match the skills that we see in the West, and they'll be able to utilize those for both teaching and also for problem solving. We want to also appreciate that Africa needs to redesign the curriculum. The education curriculum needs to change, needs to be reflect the needs that are there for the society. We have been so much on knowledge-based. I think that's a weakness we have had. We now have to scale up and start thinking about what are these digital competences that our children need, and how do we sit and be able to come up with a curriculum that can be able to produce learners who can be able to survive anywhere in the continent, and they can be able to solve any problem, including climate change. So I think, to me, those are the three key areas that we need to think about: enhancing collaboration and knowledge sharing, think about co-sharing the infrastructure, because we may not be able to provide every infrastructure to the learners, but we can share whatever we have. And also, finally, we need to redesign the curriculum to enhance digital competences in our systems.
Great. Sally, let me hear your thoughts on this. How do we create a more enabling environment for us to be able to scale EdTech innovations on the continent?
One of the things that the private sector requires or needs to be able to have an enabling environment is regulations and policy that supports the private sector. When you have incentives for innovators to be able to come into the market and support, then what Dr. Mbore is asking for, simple things like shared information, are easy, because you will find a lot of private sector actually thrives a lot in the education sector. The reason why they thrive is many organizations believe in doing business for good and doing good for business. So if I'm able to participate in maybe a CSR activity, a corporate social responsibility activity that really brings in shared information or experience to the education sector, and in turn I can get business out of the education sector because then the technology is adopted, then I'm happy to do it. I have no challenge doing it. So creating that policy environment that allows people to be able to have incentives that allow them to enter into the market and provide EdTech would be a good way for us to have an enabling environment.
Right. So the right policy frameworks. Femi, I want to hear your views as well, very briefly, and then we'll go to Genevieve.
Yeah, I think conversations actually is one of the key ways to go. Conversations from government to government, conversations amongst all the stakeholders, because the better we understand each other, the better we understand the landscape, the better we understand the challenges, the more we're able to tailor support to the to entrepreneurs that will help them scale. I think we can also leverage the commonalities amongst us across different regions. For example, there's a West African Examination Council that regulates examinations across West Africa. And this means that this is an opportunity for any EdTech company supporting exam preparations or learnings based on the similar curriculums that we all have to scale. So bringing those conversations on how to leverage those commonalities. Closed economies like the ECOWAS or the WIMO region, being able to have those conversations, how can we leverage those commonalities? Typically, if you build something that works in Senegal, you might be able to scale it across all the entire WIMO region. I think the last is maybe how to support the companies to build language engines that enable their products to be used in other countries. One of our fellows was able to introduce French, for example, into their product, and this gave them access into YMO easily. So this is, I think, the kind of things that we can do to support the fellows.
All right, Genevieve, your thoughts briefly?
I have quite a number of thoughts on this. So I want to, disagree a little bit with Dr. Mboya when he said you need to know the right person. When you're scaling and trying to move across different countries, knowing the right person will be very difficult. So I think that the right person should come forward and tell us, this is me, come to me with your solutions, your technologies, your ideas. Let's do this together. Let's not make it a hide and seek, cat and mouse kind of game. Let that be for conversation and support coming from the government side of things. Femi mentioned how, in West Africa, there's a WIAC examination. And I'm thinking of a situation where, if one company is able to do it in Ghana, then, the government should be able to have a conversation where the same company can do it for Nigeria, can do it for Gambia, can do it for Sierra Leone, without having to go there physically. That would make the entrepreneurs work a lot easier and even a lot of costs. Can you imagine going to all these countries trying to say that you're doing the same thing over and over again? I'd also like to touch on the fact that now that you've identified the different stakeholders in education space, have a pilot with them. The realities are for different countries or different even cities in one country are quite grand. So for instance, the EdTech solution I might have in Accra would work very differently in Kumasi, would work very differently in Tamale. I need to be able to pilot the solution and see that, you know what, it can work here or it won't work here for the following reasons. And then I'm able to make a few changes, talk to focus groups, see how I can support their needs, because the stakeholders, of course, are at the center of everything that we do. We're focusing on our learners, we're focusing on the teachers. We want the Ministry of Education to meet their targets. So we need to be able to have these conversations and these pilots that actually work, instead of just rolling out a solution and saying that, you know what, because it worked in Accra, it's going to work in Tamale, or because it worked in Nairobi, it's going to work perfectly in Turkana. The realities will be very different. You need to actually do pilots and test your solutions in all these areas.
And so, we've all agreed that we do need friendly policies that can support partnerships, that can support the solutions themselves, that can support even the extending and creation of infrastructure across our learning institutions so that we are able to embrace more technology in education. But let's talk about these policies and the policy considerations and frameworks that can support the scaling of EdTech. Given the fact that we are still pointing to the government as the creator of an enabling environment, can we then talk about these policies and what they should look like if we are going to have an excellent EdTech ecosystem in Africa? Dr. Mboya, why don't you start us off on this one?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think I have to speak again to Genevieve's concern about
Right.
Yeah, allow me to speak to that. In a government setting like the one I work with, duties and roles and functions are assigned to individuals. You might find that it's a big organization, and it's actually there is a key person that has been assigned that person, that issue. What happens is when you write a letter, for instance, to the Teacher Service Commission, to the government, it will be received and given to somebody else. And if that person is not the field, then it's likely to stay there for quite some time before it can be able to be addressed and be able to be attended to. So my experience is that before you send a letter, before you communicate, you need to know where does it fall. The stakeholder analysis, the analysis of that organization and how the organization operates would be an added advantage, the way they do in the interview, that this is an added advantage. You have known the right person, you know where you are going to play your game, you know the person to speak to. I have seen that in government. Some policies have really been very effective because of the way the people who are driving that policy were able to identify the people they need to work with in the government. That one I want
Great.
to really encourage you for that. Now, one policy environment, we need to, it is true the government has a responsibility and a role to be able to create an enabling environment for EdTech. But the government needs to know what is EdTech. The government needs to be informed and educated to actually appreciate. And I think that is what is missing because the other issue you have to appreciate in the government setting is that it is the changeover is very high. We have a very high.
Yeah.
Today I'm doing this role. Tomorrow somebody else comes and does that role. And if he's not appraised properly, then so many policies are put on the shelves and they're left. Transitions when they come, experience also if government transits, then you can be sure there are going to be so many things that will stagnate. And therefore, there must be a way that we constantly engage the government. And one of the things that I said is an important is knowledge sharing. Like I like this, I normally attend the sessions for EdTech summits and all those things. They provide the stakeholder, the government, to understand what is in the market and what they need to do. So the other policy that we need is to allow, to champion. The private sector has the benefit of pushing the government to accept new policies. I may not do that from where I sit. I may not be able to push for a new agenda because I'm employed and I'm given terms and reference about my engagement. But from the private sector, a new idea, they can lobby, they can be able to put pressure so that the government can play and be able to adopt. We still have a problem in Kenya, for instance, where our learners are not allowed to use mobile phones in school. Is it a good policy? Is it not time we look at that and say, I think we need to put up mechanism to be able to do. So we need the constant stakeholder push, let me use that word, to get the policies that are relevant to push EdTech into the education system. So you can be sure, Genevieve, that I may not know what is good because I'm inside. I need to hear a door being knocked. I need to hear the hawkers talking about the beauty of this program and how they impact. That
All
is
right.
what is missing at the moment. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Mboya. So we need constant government engagement and stakeholder push. Femi, briefly, what are your thoughts?
Actually, I'm just going to jump on Dr. Mboya's comment there about private sector supporting the government. This year, for example, we have agreed with STEMLOS as a center for open schooling at distance level in Ghana, who are responsible for managing or creating the EdTech policy. We've agreed with them to convert our EdTech stakeholder program this year to one where we help crowdsource input to the policy. So I think this aligns with your comment, Dr. Mboya. The government, what the government is telling us in Ghana is that we want your support, we want to hear from you, the stakeholders. So we've kind of converted our program to help with this. And I think from a policy position, this Dr. Mboya's position is correct. But I think also between government to government of different countries, there needs to be a lot of discussions because different governments are at different stages of advancement in policy, EdTech policy implementation. And there's no need to reinvent the wheel when you don't need to. So why don't we, can we, maybe the ministerial conference that's coming up in Abuja next, in about 2 weeks, is an opportunity to say, governments, can you talk to each other, share knowledge, share information, so that we can learn from each other. So this is one. And I think as part of it will come maybe what a policy alignment. So if Kenya has a policy, EdTech policy to advance, then I don't need to evolve something different from Kenya. Can I evolve something that is aligned with Kenya so that we can collaborate much easier? And we also have like policy exchange. We've developed some area of the policy that's really well matured. And can I borrow that in Kenya? Maybe there's someone who can give Kenya back. So I think these are key considerations that we need to look at in the policy discussion.
Yeah, I agree with the former speakers, even you, Dr. Mboya, that we do need to, approach the right people to have these conversations. But I also want to suggest that if the government could be proactive instead of reactive, we know that there are exposed, they travel, they send their children to very good schools. So they should know these things. They should know these things. But I speak on the side of private sector. The costs of EdTech is quite high. You need tools, you need internet connection, and you need electricity. So if you could have, and I think Sally will speak a bit more on this, having to produce the hardware, we could do that locally. We have TVET colleges in our different countries that are able to manufacture quite quality, resources for different things. So if you could consider having our TVET schools producing some of this technology, that would reduce the cost. And then talking to the telcos, we need them to be able to zero rate this EdTech learning tools, make sure that they're affordable to the learners, because the more we have cost on education, as Sally said, then we're increasing the digital gap. We have EdTech, we have quality education on the EdTech, but it's not going to be accessible to people who cannot afford the tools or cannot pay for the connection.
If I could add two policies to the policies that we have, and one already exists, the first one would be on inclusivity. While we think about reducing the digital divide, we need to think about those who are able differently. And I'm saying this because I have participated in several conversations with the blind, for example. Today, the way the education system is, it already disenfranchises them. However, technology improves their outcomes because a blind person is not always able to read. And literacy for the blind means you have to learn Braille. Now, if you have technology, for example, a device that is able to talk to you, then you improve your literacy without having to learn Braille. And I recently had a conversation with the Kenya Society for the Blind, and they were telling me one of the things that has really helped them is not everybody that comes into the institution must have or must learn Braille. Braille is the best way to learn because it improves literacy. However, when they have devices that talk back to them, then they are able to increase their literacy and understand and go through education like anybody else. So you bridge the gap that is already there. So inclusivity is one of them. I think one conversation that we've not had today is about security. And this country has data protection laws. So having clear rules and guidelines on data protection will probably help Dr. Mboya with the challenge that schools have today of why don't students have mobile phones. It's one, lack of understanding. What is the opportunity that a mobile phone can bring for a student? And what are the features that we need to disable to ensure things like cheating are not happening? However, the access to the information is still enabled. Many times we want to put devices in the hands of children, and remember the children that we have today are digital natives. They are not learning anything new about the internet or the digital space. So we need to think about how do data protection and policy laws allow for EdTech to thrive? If we could change anything from a policy perspective, is ensuring that the regulations and the rules in data protection actually support EdTech. Final thing I would say is digital literacy must be a conversation that the government takes. Because if you do not prioritize digital literacy, same way we learned how to write when we went to school, just learning how to write was the first thing, and then learning how to read was the second thing. Digital literacy needs to start at that level. And then exactly, redesigning the curriculum so that digital literacy becomes part of the curriculum. We would not be having these conversations, we'd be having conversations around what more can we do from a research perspective, what more can we do with the children.
Great, I like that. And I think that with this conversation we just had, we probably know where the pain points are. And we know where these solutions can come from in terms of transforming our education on the African continent. Thank you all for joining us on this conversation that we just had with amazing panelists. I mean, we had Olufemi Adeomi from MEST in Ghana, and we also had Genevieve Simiyu from Chalkboard Education. She's also based in Accra, Ghana. We had Dr. Tom Mboya Okaya from the Teachers Service Commission, and Sally Kemeo, who is from Nutanix. And well, a conversation we've had on scaling impact for education transformation. From what I gather, if I'm going to summarize this rich conversation we just had, is that we need to, first of all, create knowledge sharing spaces, not just from the practice side of things, but also across the board from the government. We need co-shared infrastructure. We need to redesign our curriculum to suit the current needs of EdTech initiatives across the continent. And we also need to build language engines so that we're able to accommodate the different spaces and different demands that we have on the African continent. Piloting sessions is something we need to put into consideration as well, and constantly engaging government stakeholders is one other factor we should consider. Tools for internet connection are also another factor, and zero rating EdTech solutions tools is something that we could consider in our policies as well, and much more that we've had conversations on this edition. I'd like to thank you all for joining us, and join us again on the next edition, where we will be speaking education technology for resilient and inclusive learning in Africa. My name is Joy Bira. Until the next one, let's keep the conversation going on our online platforms, Facebook, X, LinkedIn, and everywhere else you can find us. Thank you, and bye-bye for now.
EdTech Mondays Africa is supported by the MasterCard Foundation Center for Innovative Teaching and Learning and is part of the MasterCard Foundation Young Africa Works programming.